My name is Barrie Rice. I'm a former soldier for the New Zealand Special Air Service. The last 30 years I've been a mercenary and bodyguard all over the world. This is everything I'm authorized to tell you. Everyone has a negative connotation of mercenaries, right? They all think they're a bunch of wild geese killers and go out there and do that, and it's not. They're generally there supporting an agency. And so there's always going to be some part of an entity, a government, or an agency who will use them for nefarious purposes. The word mercenary is an old term now. We're now called security contractors. Basically somebody who works for a foreign government or a foreign company for money. The value system or what they believe in and the ethics doesn't come into it. In late 2003, I went to Baghdad and this started my mercenary work. Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I was really focused on was the fact that I was going to be earning some decent money. The main principle of close protection and military contracting work when you're looking after somebody is to avoid conflict. If you're running around shooting up everybody every day, then you're doing your job completely wrong. Close protection is to allow the client to do his job unhindered. We were tasked with escorting clients to go to the ministries around the different ministries, the electoral ministry, the oil ministry, talking to the different peoples to try and pick up Iraq again, get it back on its feet. Back in those days, 2003, the early part of 2004, we were still accepted by the locals. Okay, they knew we were there to help. That didn't change until maybe about sort of 2 months, 3 months later on the ground, and then things started to go ugly. If we had a task that we had to do is, say, take a client to a meeting in town, you couldn't afford things like punctures, you couldn't afford breakdowns. If you had like a Suburban or the Trailblazer, which had a trunk that could lift up, we'd have a driver, one guy in the front, two guys on each side, and a tail gunner. He'd be facing the back, and he normally had a belt-fed machine gun or something quite powerful, so he would always be facing back. So if anyone tried to approach you from the rear, he had enough firepower to keep them away. And everybody was given arcs of responsibilities, so everybody was up to speed as to what was going on the entire time that it was happening. Then when you get to the venue, if your sniper's going to go to the roof, because you always try to carry someone who could do overwatch, always remembering that your mission is to bring back the client. When we started off with Blackwater and there were no armoured vehicles coming into the country, everyone had ordered them, but it took a long time for them to come in. When we did start getting better vehicles, we had the fully armoured Nissan flatbed trucks that we had. The disadvantage of that for us is that you can't shoot out of them because you can't wind the windows down. The advantage of the soft-skin vehicles is that you can shoot out of them, and you can shoot through the doors, you can shoot through the windows. It's not a problem if you need to. So probably one of the most common areas where anybody over there at the time would run into was on Route Irish. It was about a 6 mile stretch of road. You know, you were constricted. You had a side of the highway going to the airport, and you had a side of the highway coming back from the airport. So you couldn't really deviate from that road. They would try and attack the military and along that road with IEDs, improvised explosive device, strapped to the safety barriers or car bombs or whatever. So it got to be a bit of a shooting gallery. The local insurgents, as it were, saw Blackwater as another extension of the US government. So you were always on the lookout. If the traffic was bad, and sometimes you had to be a little bit aggressive to get people out of the way, so you could get through and get your client out of there, and would say sorry later. What was initially a safe-ish stretch of 6 mile highway became perhaps the most deadliest road in the world. January, February, beginning of March in Iraq of 2004, things are still relatively quite sort of peaceful, but that all changed on the 31st. So our guys, they were tasked to go and do a job. They had to go through or around Fallujah to get to the base that they needed to get to. However, the team leader that they had stopped and asked the local Iraqi police what was the best way of getting there. And as they left, there was only 2 soft-skin vehicles with 2 people in each vehicle, 3 flatbed trucks in between. A very lovely soft target was coming through, and of course they set up an ambush. We saw that. Okay, so I was in the team house, and I was with a couple of the other guys there, and TV was going, and we could see this vehicle burning, and it looked very familiar to us. panned around and we saw bodies, inside the vehicle being burnt, and they were being beaten by the locals and all that sort of carry on. And then we realised it was our guys, okay, and it was really a stop moment, and you could kind of feel the change in history, if you know what I mean, for those of us who are on the ground, that this was now more than just helping them rebuild, their country. This was now our war as well. The most disturbing thing about it for me was that the insurgents, or the guys who attacked our boys, they got them in ambush, they killed them, they took their weapons, but it was what the locals were doing. It was the locals that were beating them up. After the boys got killed in Fallujah, the Marines and the US military went in there for a second time and basically flattened Fallujah. And that one incident was history changing. That one incident caused the death and destruction of thousands of people. So the ROEs, or rules of engagement, are what we are guided to and what we're told to do and how we are to act. Okay, generally, like for the military, you aren't allowed to shoot at somebody until you can identify a weapon or they're trying to shoot at you. Pretty limiting, okay, but you want to try and win hearts and minds. You just don't want to go around, killing everybody. However, for us, we didn't have such restrictions. If we thought that we needed to engage somebody, we were technically allowed to. The Bush administration at the time were making all sorts of rules that had never been done before. That did not mean at all that we would go around just shooting at someone because we felt like it. However, if we did, legally we were cleared to be able to do that. And there were guys in some companies, would be running cars off the road, forcing them to crash, shooting a lot more into the bonnets, and you're a real bad kind of human being if you do that. And even if you tried that in the military, then, your friends would quite rightly either tell on you or put a bullet in the back of your head. In my teams, I made sure none of that ever happened. And if there were people who were going out there in order to try and get a head count or a body count, it was quite quickly that they would be either taken care of or moved out. We did fire for sure, but we had to watch out for different target indicators, okay? And if they failed these different target indicators, then we could perhaps consider them to be a bit more anti-us, and we would have to act accordingly. The biggest thing was never to wait too long, and then you find that you're on the receiving end of something that was that you could have avoided. Blackwater commercial, there was they had to equip a lot of people in a short period of time. So what the company did was they bought hundreds of guns just from wherever they could find them. And when we came in, we had them placed all over the front yard of our team house. The gun is a big misconception about close protection. Guns don't make the job. It's about using your brain, using your observation skills, and getting out of there, or understanding and reading the situation. And part of when you're buying second, third hand, 20-year-old guns, or whatever the age they may be, is you got to make sure that they work. So myself and about 3 other guys were given the task of stripping, assembling, oiling up, and testing these guns. Also, you had to make sure that anything that you bought from the street hadn't been booby-trapped in a way that if you were to use it, it would blow up in your hands and kill the operator. And all those guns that we had were all of the AK variant, and you'll find most conflicts, they all use the AKs. Those magazines are all prevalent. Those parts are all prevalent. If you use more exotic guns like the M4s or the HKs, they're harder to find the pieces, and if you run out of bullets in a firefight, you just can't go and pick up some that are on the ground. You have to grab the whole gun. The one thing I was sort of very impressed with, but sort of like very sort of, I'd say jealous and giggled about, was the amount of gear that my American colleagues brought in. I mean, these guys had 511 trousers, shirts, hats, vests. But the thing was, when we got the AK-47s and vests that were 7 sizes too big for us, none of that stuff was any good for them. The one thing that I think was an advantage, coming from where I came from in New Zealand, was that our military was, sure, we were equipped as best as we could, but we could also make do with what we didn't have. So a lot of guys struggled who had all this Gucci kit but didn't have anything to put it onto, right? And they couldn't really adjust to to the basics of what we actually ended up having on the ground. When we finally were able to get body armour, we'd have body armour, which was a must, and we'd have a vest. I carried an MP5, Heckler & Koch MP5, which is a small 9mm submachine gun, sort of the Rolls-Royce standard of submachine guns back in the day. And the reason I carried this was because inside a vehicle, it was very short and compact, and you were close enough where you could put rounds down. Now, you're not going to snipe anybody while you're driving in a vehicle. You want to put enough rounds down, hopefully, to distract them from shooting back at you. Also, I had 4 other guys up in the vehicle who had AK-47s, and they were big enough. In fact, we even had a bigger weapon than that, and we had a belt-fed machine gun in the trunk. So there was plenty of high-powered firepower that we needed. Also, I had an RPK or an RPD. I'd taken the bipod off, which was a long-barreled AK-47, and I carried an M72 rocket launcher. We would also carry, if we had them, white phosphor grenades or flashbangs. And it depended on your job in the team, dictated what you carried. And what I brought into my teams after seeing a video of someone being kidnapped was that we would put a piece of red electrical tape around one of the magazines, and we carried 3 magazines for our pistol. And if we got into the firefight and we were bogged down that badly that we ended up, our last magazine had red tape on the end, was to the reason to do that was not to be captured and star in our own decapitation video that our families would see for the rest of their lives. So the hierarchy that we were under while we were there was the owner and his subordinates and back in the US, and then you'd have your contract managers and your project managers, and then your team leaders, and then your guys on the ground. And again, it's exactly the same as being in the military. You have to have your chain of command, and things go up and down in order to be cleared and whatever. However, like a special forces unit, the people on the ground who are running their teams, like I was with my guys and the guys that I was looking after with other teams, we are given quite a loose rein. We are able to make decisions that we think are going to get the job done or are going to achieve the goal. I briefed before we went on any mission. I briefed when we got back. We trained every week. We cleaned our weapons on a certain day every week. Then we would relax, we would have beers, would smoke. However, with that, we also had within our company teams and different teams on different contracts that didn't train, they didn't brief, they didn't take the job as seriously, and they paid the price. And they worked as a bunch of individuals, and they lost lives. I was fortunate that I never lost any one of my clients, nor any one of my boys, and when we did have to work to get out of a situation that could have been deadly, we worked very, very efficiently and very, very cohesively. And at the beginning stages, we could fire people if we felt like they weren't up to scratch. But as months and years went on, it became harder and harder. And you're starting to get guys who weren't of military background. You'd get like former police, you'd get former security guards. We had these 2 guys come over, went out to the airport, picked up a bunch of guys, and these 2 guys that were f***ing fat. There's no other word for it. They came back to the team house, and then I got a call from the team house manager, and she says, I've got these 2 guys who are going to join your team. And I looked at them, and I just sort of laughed. I said, there's no way, These guys are big. And I just said, no, this is not going to work. The reason I signed up back in 2003 initially was because, which is the same reason for a lot of soldiers or ex-soldiers when they get out, is that we have all these skills that are not really appreciated or monetarily valued sort of worth in civilian street. We've got very high qualifications and high skills. When the opportunity came around to get paid for it in a conflict war situation, we jump at the chance. The paycheck was very encouraging. It was the carrot that was very encouraging to get over there and do. However, once on the ground, it was like, you were working for every dollar. I was paid the same as the guys, as everybody else, which was basically a standard salary across the whole company, being in the ground. Believe me, coming from New Zealand, $600 a day back then, what more money did I want? I mean, that was just being greedy, There was a insurance policy for harm, like I think it was DBA. That was all part of the being over there. Yeah, I mean, every security company had generally ended up buying or renting a villa inside the IZ, and the houses in Iraq are generally pretty big. What we had was a really nice three-story villa. And we had a front yard out it with 2 date trees, and we used to sit out on the front each night and pull up our plastic tables and have a few beers. Each team had a room. Me and my boys, we had one room bunk beds, and we made it as comfortable as possible. We had offices, briefing room, kitchen, TV room. When you come from the military, you're used to having not a lot of anything, all right, and you make the best of what you do have, and you make it comfortable, and you make it home. And this was probably a point of contention with the military, because we could drink and they couldn't, and that would piss them off a bit as well. They're on a dry contract. We were allowed to drink, and we did. We went ugly early. We drank like there was no tomorrow, and because we had a day to recover, kind of thing. Or I mean, every weekend there would be a party, and some of them big, and some of them not so big, and some we went to, and some we didn't. Our rotations were 3 months on, 1 month off, which was perfect sort of timing, really, because after 3 months you're pretty cooked. We were sort of meant to work side by side with the military, okay. But the military, at the end of the day, were in charge. We'd see them all the time, checkpoints, convoys, and whatever else. However, it became pretty apparent pretty soon that they had a bit of a lower regard for us. We got paid a lot more than they did. We were all former military, like they were. They were still in the military. They were still under the sort of the range of what they could and couldn't do. We could go home at any time we wanted. We had great rotations. We had a great salary. They were stuck there. They had to fulfill their contracts. And it became apparent that we were facing quite a lot of animosity towards them. They would deliberately send us around different roads from their checkpoints. They wouldn't, open gates for us, or they would just basically leave us waiting out, making our jobs a lot harder than it had to be. And we ran into that a lot. Particularly if you saw a convoy or whatever stopped on the side of the road, we had to ask permission to get past them, which is fair enough, because we were driving around same sort of civilian vehicles as the insurgency, right? And you got a lot of sort of young members in the military who don't really want to be there. They see a civilian car roaring past and guys dressed in civilian clothing. They don't know just from a first glance if it's an insurgent type or a contractor. They have no idea. So we came up with identification. Would wave. We had flags. Would wait till we got a thumbs up to be able to get past them. At night, you could expect a lot more sort of hostility because it was dark. They couldn't really see who we were. Our vehicles were beat up and dirty. So you just had to be a lot more careful. We were coming back into the CPA one time, coming through checkpoint, or gate 11, checkpoint 1. And so we were driving up, and sure enough, we were waiting for it. You start seeing ping, ping, ping on the side of the road. Okay, they're shooting at us, all right? So that means stop. And so we'd stop, we'd put up our flag, we'd yell out, we'd wave. I got out, I put my hands out, just like you see on TV with the cops. And then I got out and I took my weapon off, put it in. I made sure I did nothing aggressive or nothing, speedy fast, because you don't know how old this, little prick on the other end of a 50 cal is down there who's scared enough to shoot at you. Took off all my gear, put it in the vehicle, spun around nice and slowly, and then tried to encourage them that we were friendlies and we wanted to come in. Ping, ping, ping. Here we go, guys. We're getting shot at again. And I'm pissed off at this stage because this has happened more than 3 or 4 times. So I get out and I yell up to the towers. I said, "Who the shooting at us?" And this senior guy comes out and he goes, "Oh, we are." So I said, "Who the you think you are?" And I had it out with him. I'd had enough. And it wasn't just me and my teams. It was almost everybody has got stories of being shot at by the military by these a-holes up in the towers. Mukhtar Sada, he had a military force called the Mahdi Army. They were doing what they thought they believed in order to protect, Baghdad, Iraq, against from the the invaders. They decided at that time that they were going to try and take over the Najaf, which is a holy city to them, and we had a CPA office down there. The American guy in charge, as a civilian, was protected by a Blackwater team. So the boys were down there looking after him. There was a contingent of Marines with them. So our guys basically fought them off. We got as many sort of guns and ammunition and everything they needed resupply with, and it was going to be taken to Najaf to help them out in the battle. We were going to drive our team because I'd been there before, but it was deemed to be, too many checkpoints on the way. We would have been ambushed and probably would never have made it. However, so we got permission to use the company helicopters. And those guys loaded up the company helicopters, and they did a fantastic job. Very brave guys and fantastic guys, picked up injured Marines, brought them back. And they did runs and shuttle runs every so often. They provided enough ammunition and support for the boys to be able to protect the CPA until such time as the Māori Army backed off. Then the aftermath of that, because even back then, some guys would take photos in social media. It sort of blurred the lines of why civilian contractors were doing the job that the military are meant to do. A lot of people in DC didn't like that. Okay, why have all this military then if you can use civilians who can do the job? Yeah, but the thing is, the military is a lot cheaper as far as salaries and blah, blah, blah. And everyone has a negative connotation of mercenaries, right? And they played on the negative connotations of that and then tried to slander the boys for the job that they did, which I believe would not have been as successful if they had not been there. No, I think security contracting is a necessary job. They all think they're a bunch of, wild geese killers and go out there and do that, and it's not. I mean, mercenaries have been around for thousands of years. It's just bolstering and helping out a military who may be too thin on the ground to be able to do their job. It's not like we're out there doing it all on our own, or they're doing it all on their own. They're generally there supporting an agency. It should be used where possible, correctly, and I think Iraq was a very good experiment as to where it could be used properly, and I think it touched a little bit close to the bone in some cases, like I mentioned with Najaf, that civilian contractors, former military people of a very high standard, can do the job that the military can. We were doing another contract. We had to go to a meeting in Tikrit, which is about maybe, I think, 2 hours or so, sort of northish of Baghdad. But when we came back, this one bridge in particular, which was very infamous for IED attacks, they had hit somebody who was at the meeting. So we were forced to stop on the side of the road. It was about maybe 4 vehicles, I think, at the time. And as long as we stayed in the vehicles, we were fine. We were hidden. The thing we dreaded the most appeared, happened. The client wanted to go to the washroom. Generally would pee in a bottle, so we didn't have to get out. But we couldn't really ask him to do that. So we let him out after we came up with a plan. Then the plan was for just him and that vehicle security to get out. And that worked pretty well. He went in, he got out. Then all of a sudden we had one dick in the back vehicle. Then there was a guy who was a problem child. He wanted to get out for a piss as well. Despite being told not to, he just did. As soon as he did that, we had no choice but to bust all around sort of security on him and everybody else. And as soon as we did that, of course, we exposed ourselves. I started getting this feeling that, there were eyes on us and the people were coming around to give us a go. So I prepared for it by asking the guys who were closest to the outside of the road, get in a linear fashion, then move down into an overgrown date plantation. There was lots of high grass that they could sit down there and not be seen, while those of us up on the road could keep an eye out. And if nothing happened, fantastic, we could just wait till it was time to go and then leave. But what did happen was one of the guys on the ground noticed some movement, and sure enough, they identified a weapon. They identified guys creeping up on them. It was getting pretty close to us having to leave at that stage. So I decided to incorporate what was basically called like a mad minute. Told everybody on the ground on the count of 3, let off a burst in that general direction. So 3, 2, 1, boom, everything kicked up. Everyone their pants who was in the vehicles, and they all tried to get out of there. Then we sent out a clearing patrol, or a couple of guys went out to go and have a look, and sure enough, there were signs of weapons, there were signs of blood. So I was pretty happy with the decision that I had made, and deduced that what we did was right. It saved us from being attacked, and that's what you're all about. So we just got back in and left the scene. So when I first went over, I mean, the only thing that I was really focused on was the fact that I was going to be earning some decent money. I was going over there to fulfill a job, as we were told, get them back on their feet and rebuild. As the years went on, I felt a degree of sympathy with the Iraqi people, and a sort of sense of, you've been shafted, you've been lied to, and that became more and more apparent, not only to myself, but to a lot of the guys as the years went on, that this was never about rebuilding. This was all about land grab, resource grab, and the premise of going was a complete lie. And they say that we were there to fight the terrorists and the insurgents, and then when you boil it all down, you could quite fairly say that we were the terrorists and we were the insurgents, because we were in their country. They formed guerrilla groups and fought against an invading, occupying force. When you see these politicians who were all for it, let's go over there and invade, even though it was so obvious that Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11 or anything like this, and have now since changed their tune. And everybody will want to try and get on the right side of history and erase their support for an illegal invasion. That's quite sickening. The people who are the real mercenaries are the ones who are wearing suits, the ones who are sending people out. The politicians, the weapons manufacturers, the donors to the politicians, for those who will benefit without getting their hands dirty, profiteering from the death and destruction of another country. And that's how politics works, particularly here in the US. I'd left the company when the Nassau Square incident happened in 2007. I think that situation was the perfect storm of anything that could go wrong, going wrong. So what had happened was our State Department contractor were going out to do some, escorting. There was always one major circle called Nassau Circle, or Nassau Square, Nassau Circle, where you were bound to always get contacted. Okay, everybody knew that was a very dangerous area. So what happens, and I wasn't there, but this is just from reading about it and studying about it. They went through that circle. They believed they were contacted. They got into a firefight. And in the process, civilians got killed. That was a perfect opportunity for the Iraqi government and anybody anti-security contracting and anybody anti-Blackwater to just dump on us. And of course, everyone thinks, a bunch of murdering pricks. They got what they deserved when they went to jail. However, when you're on the ground, things aren't as cut as dry. Simple as that. So after Blackwater, I was living in Jordan, so I did a bit of work around the region, Beirut, Syria, Egypt. But then I went back into Iraq, but with other companies, and worked up in Kurdistan, which was nowhere near as intense as the central and southern part of Iraq. And we were doing a lot of sort of like just walking around the countryside, looking after people, doing seismic survey and stuff like this. But my drinking at that stage had reached the point where it was now becoming a hindrance to me doing the job properly. So I was also at a point where I had to get out of the country, because in my head, I was going to die if I stayed any longer because of my mental instability. So I sort of realised that, and then I left there. So I was in Iraq for a total of 7 years. I then did sort of close combat, close protection in places like South Sudan, Mali, West Africa, all around. Wherever there was a conflict, I was able to find work. So I was taking up whatever contracts would come along. A couple of the contracts that I did in Africa were training contracts, training presidential guards how to do close protection, and everything that was around doing close protection, and to a certain degree, in preparation for perhaps coups or hostile takeovers, because they're so intertribal.
I know, there's a coup attempt slightly after you were in South Sudan.
What the f*** are you talking about?
Yeah. So yeah, how do you feel about the morality of some of the other stuff that you've taken on?
I've never turned down a contract because of what I think would be too dangerous. But I have turned down many contracts, actually, because A, runs across one of my golfing days. I'm playing golf, so no, I don't want to. B, it doesn't pay enough for what I'm expected to do. And C, and I won't tell you which one, but it goes against my moral compass as to what I was expected to do.
You don't want to talk about that?
No, I don't want to talk about that. Now, maybe as a younger person, I would have accepted it when I was desperate for money. But now that I'm an older person, not so desperate for money, what they would have asked me to do is something that I wouldn't morally be able to do. No, looking back, it doesn't worry me. I had to do what I had to do in order to be where I am today. And I suppose the only time I have any real issues about what I've seen, done, or where I've been is Iraq, really. And I think that was more because of the from what I saw, the damage that was done. As you see and do things, or as you particularly see things like in Iraq, for example, you can't erase them from your memories, or you can't erase them from your minds. My particular situation, it wasn't anything to do with conflict at all. Anything I did conflict-wise, I have absolutely no problems with, and I'll sleep like a baby. But this one incident, not long after we got there was a bombed big pile of rubbish, big pile of concrete. But there was this boy who used to come out at night and would look at him and would try and give him food, but he would scamper back into the rubble. And he lived in the rubble. And we came back one evening, and I said to the Iraqi guard, I asked the Iraqi guard, and I said, he spoke English, I said, who's this kid? And, why is he always going in and out of this bombed-out car park? He said, no, it's not a car park. He said, that used to be an apartment block, and it got hit in the initial stages of the bombings, and it collapsed, and everyone in it got killed except for him because he wasn't there at the time, and his family is still in there, dead, obviously. And you could see he'd lost his mind, completely lost his mind. And that really made me think about my kids at home. And they were of the same age. And for some reason, that really stuck with me, and it still is. I suppose the hardest part of the job, believe it or not, was when you went home on your 1 month off, you're away from your brothers. And you didn't want anything to happen to them while you were away. And during those times, they are more important than your family, and you can't relate to your family. You can't tell them what you're doing. They don't understand, and nor should they, but your brothers can. And if I thought about the boy and everything else, or sort of other things that were playing on my mind, it would sort of send me into a dark place. And PTSD to me is like depleted uranium. As time goes on, more sand covers it and covers it. But as soon as you kick that sand again, pops up again as fresh as it was the day I first landed there. So I'd try and bury them by drinking. Alcohol wasn't burying it for me. Alcohol just kept kicking it and kicking it. And I joined another sort of company where the job wasn't as morally sort of sound as it was, but then again I was at a mental state where I didn't care. My high moral standards had dropped through the sink again because I was needing money, and I'd do whatever I had to do to get it. The PTSD is always there, and what helps me control it is the fact that I don't drink anymore, and it has certainly helped with the PTSD. It doesn't keep kicking the sand for me. It doesn't keep bringing it to the surface. It's always there, and I can accidentally kick the sand sometimes, and it could be just a question like you've asked me, but I can control it better. When I was drinking, I couldn't control it. I joined the military in 1985 with the intention of joining the New Zealand Special Air Service. I did a year in battalion, then I got posted to Singapore for 2 years. In the early stages of 1988, I decided I would now try for selection course. I did selection for our SAS, very, very tough, very grueling. I passed, and then I did 7 years in the unit itself. We were called the unit back then. I was a counter-terrorism team commander and a troop commander in the amphibious unit, so I was a diver. I really enjoyed my time there, but it's very tough. It's very hard on the body. So after 10 years in total in my military service, I decided to get out. And before my body totally collapsed, knees were going, hips were going, I was still young enough to sort of, be able to do some physical work, but I didn't want to get too old and be completely broken before I could do anything else. The skills that it teaches you how to work alone or how to lead, and not everybody can be a leader. They teach you how to think very quickly and to come to a solution very quickly. And as things change, and if it doesn't go to plan, having another plan. Always thinking, and always working towards a successful outcome. Your fitness level's supreme, and making the most out of sort of quite bad situations and pushing yourself further than you perhaps thought that you could go. So I first joined a company called Custer Battles. The day-to-day sort of work that I thought that we would be doing was basic close protection, looking after civilians who were then going around to different ministries. When I got on the ground, it soon became apparent to me and a few others that some of the operating procedures were perhaps verging on a little bit sort of reckless for what we were expected to do. Even though it was very initial stages in the war, we knew there wouldn't be a lot of material, there wouldn't be a lot of equipment, there wouldn't be a lot of support, but it seemed to be even less. So when we first arrived, we expected to be fully kitted out, body armour, latest Gucci guns, optics and all this sort of carry on. But when we went to the ranges and we were given these AK-47s that looked as if they'd been used for anti-piracy on the Ark, this sort of red flags started to pop up. We went on the range a couple of times and I actually had one explode in my hands. That's how old it was and how in disrepair this gun was. It wasn't a good start. So after a month of being with Custer Battles, it became very apparent that things weren't going to get any better any time sooner. There was about maybe 11 of us who were there going, this is not quite right. But there was one person in the group who I had not met, and he had a contact in back here in the States with a company called Blackwater. So word went around without making it too obvious, and there was meetings going on that would break away from Custer Battles. I was given the opportunity to have a meeting with this guy. After about an hour, he offered me a job. He then told me what the daily rate would be if we succeeded, which was from $200 a day with Custer Battles to $600 a day with Blackwater, which is phenomenal money back then, phenomenal money. Particularly for someone from New Zealand, right? I mean, I was doing cartwheels, and then I thought, okay, well, now that I've got my kahunas out on the table, I'll ask if I can be the team leader. And then he said yes again. We all packed up our gear and left. There will always be a need for a mercenary group. I got offered to work as a mercenary in Ukraine, but the pay wasn't worth anything for me to be interested in. And also, that kind of warfare is old style warfare, to be honest. Trench warfare, wearing uniforms. I haven't done that since I was in the military, and it's a completely different type of method of fighting compared to what we were doing in Iraq or Libya or anywhere else. And we weren't always fighting in Iraq or Libya or anything like that. We were protecting. Here it's actual sort of, moving up to advance and face the enemy. That's more soldiers, that's a younger person's type of warfare, and something that I hadn't done in a very long time. Currently, I think mercenaries are getting a really bad name because of what's happening in Israel. What those guys, in my opinion, are doing over there is completely disgraceful. The way I see how private military contracting companies are being used today, or mercenary companies, there's always going to be some part of an entity, a government, or an agency who will use them for nefarious purposes. And you'll always find people who would do it. Warfare's changed. I would not want to be a soldier nowadays with the way, particularly Ukraine, with drone warfare. Being a soldier on the ground is almost going to be obsolete. As soon as you poke your head out of a hole, the drone's going to smack into it. Also with AI that's coming along, it's all going to be sort of drone and done from afar. It's not going to be boots on the ground so much anymore. I've semi-retired. For the last, say, 15 years on and off, but now I was working for a very interesting client, a human rights lawyer, and we've done some very amazing some work all around the world. As a civilian bodyguard for executive protection agent, whatever you want to call yourself, you don't have the ability to carry guns everywhere you go. There's no such thing as an international firearms license. So you have to rely on your skills, your observation skills, your instincts and your training and your years of experience. Where as a armed mercenary, close protection agent, you don't have to be the grey man so much because you're dressed in armour, you've got a gun, people can see you. When you're a civilian, you're dressed in a suit or you're dressed in civilian clothing, you blend in because the one thing you don't want to do is attract attention to yourself. I'm in my 60s. I, like to play golf and sit in the sun a little bit more now. I've gone away and I've done movies, I've done TV shows. I've written a book and it's called We Were Blackwater, and it's about everything that we've spoken about. I live with a wife who now understands I don't drink anymore. She stopped drinking in order to support me. We live way up on a hill in a country I don't want to tell you what it is. We rescue animals and we live a very tranquil life compared to what it used to be. I now have a better relationship with my children, and through the book they can see now why I was the absent father that I was, far better than I can verbally explain it to them.
Hi, I'm a producer on Authorized Account. If you like this episode, then you should check out our new podcast and comment below with the names of people you'd love to hear us interview.